Okay, good evening. My name is Yoav and I am the co-chair of the Latin America and Caribbean Working Group of MAPA. I welcome you to our webinar. Thank you for joining us. We are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Jemima Pierre, who will lead our conversation. Dr. Jemima Pierre is a professor of African American Studies at UCLA and coordinator of the Haiti America Committee of the Black Alliance for Peace. Thank you, Jemima, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Yoav. Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here.
That's great. Let's start with the news that I just saw yesterday, that Haiti is suffering from serious fuel shortages. People have to wait hours and hours to get gas. And also I read about new restrictions that were placed on Haitian university students in the Dominican Republic. Is Haiti better off today than it was last summer when the puppet dictator Jovenel Moise was assassinated, Jemima?
Yeah, that's a hard question. Haiti was better back in 1990 when they finally elected their, democratically elected president after being under first U.S. occupation and then a dictatorship supported by the U.S. And the European community. So things have not been good since, especially since the 2004 coup d'etat. Things have gotten gradually even worse over time. And now with everything going on in Eastern Europe, I expect that things will be even worse, especially when it comes to, livelihoods and so on, right?
Yes. You know, when I read about Haiti, I'm overwhelmed by two types of emotions. First, an outrage about the crime of Western civilization in Haiti and the ongoing vindictiveness of the West against Haiti for the past 200 years. This is one type of emotions. The other type of emotion that I feel when I read about Haiti is a feeling of admiration for Haiti for being the only successful slave rebellion in history and the first republic to abolish slavery. So let's discuss a little bit the history, which is still alive in Haiti today. And I want to start with the 18th century Haiti as the richest colony in the world, money-making machine that was based on 500,000 African slaves that were kidnapped from their homeland and shipped in chains to work on plantations to grow sugar, coffee, cotton, and to the benefit of the slave owners and the growing French bourgeoisie. Haiti was not only the most profitable colony, but also the cruelest. In 1791, the slaves in Haiti rebelled against their French slave masters, defeated French, Spanish, and British armies and navies, and in 1804, Haiti became a free republic. On July 11, 1825, the French king, Charles X, sent an armed flotilla of warship to Haiti with the message that the young nation would have to pay France 150 million francs to secure its independence or suffer the consequences. So it was the former slaves of Haiti, not the French slaveholders, who were forced to pay reparations. Now, in reality, it is until today that this heavy slavery and colonial heritage and the debt to France that makes in effect felt. Can you talk about this, Jemima?
Did you talk about the indemnity?
What is the meaning of putting a ransom, basically the forcing Haiti to pay 150 million francs that it took more than 100 years to pay? What is the impact of that on Haiti today?
Oh, it's the continuing impact is devastating on a number of levels. Most prominently, of course, is the economic devastation on Haiti, but also social. And that devastation then impacts social relations as well as Haitian politics. And so I wanted to just briefly talk about that because, you know, when Haiti declared independence in 1804, 2 years later, the country split, even though between the North and the South. And so the North had Henri Christophe, who declared independence in 1804, January 1st, which is what the independence we celebrate. And then the Southern part, we had Pétion, which was part of the mulatto elite who had joined the Haitians in independence. But there was a split between the North and the South. And that's always been really an interesting point to think about in terms of social dynamics of Haiti, because you always had the dark skinned North and the mulatto elite and the mixed race elite in the South, which still, you know, some of these dynamics are still there in Haiti in terms of politics and who's in power and who has access to resources. But after the country split, what ended up happening was the Southern president Pétion really tried to get recognition. We all have to remember when Haiti got independence and slavery was still going on in the US and all over the Americas. No one wanted to recognize this country, right? And so this is a country that's coming out of a scorched earth, war against Napoleon, defeating Napoleon's army. But then there's nothing left, at the end of this war, except for this sovereignty that they were guarding desperately. And so when this country split in 1806, the southern part, the Boyer tried to get French recognition. The U.S. would not recognize Haiti until 1862. And so France said, okay, well, in order for us to give you recognition, you'd have to pay us $150 million. Christophe said absolutely no. And then Boyer would die a couple of years later, and Christophe was assassinated. So then Pétion would die. So the president that came after Boyer, that united the country, then went to France to beg for recognition. At first, it was, I think, Louis VIII's successor, Charles X, in France, decided not to negotiate. And then later on, after France had sold the Louisiana territory for just $3 million, but this is for comparison. They told Haiti that then they might consider it. But the way that they did it was they sent an ordinance that arrived in Haiti that brought a squadron of 14 brigs of war carrying more than 500 cannons and demanded that the Haitians sign this agreement. And then that also meant then that they, Haitians, tired of war, they felt like they couldn't, rejection of this ordinance would ultimately mean war. And so this 150,000, a million francs, which is worth about $33 billion today or more, was this agreement was signed, which is a fatal document. And it was an enormous price that, if you think about it, like France's budget back then was 90 million francs, right, per year. So they're asking for that, and the Haitians could not pay. So they had to then take a loan out from the French banks to help pay this indemnity. They reneged, and then France renegotiated, brought it down to 60 million francs. And even then, it was still difficult to pay, and Haitians did not really pay it until 1947. But that also meant that this new nation had no money whatsoever for its education system. Christophe was about starting free education and so on and so forth. Until this day, the education system, the social networks that were the social all the social things that society needs, right? Healthcare and education and so on. None of those things were able to go forward because the country was so much in debt.
Yes, as a matter of fact, well, first of all, I should say to everybody, this should be a conversation. So feel free to ask a question in the chat or raise your hand, and if I will see you, I will call you, so we can have a conversation throughout the program. But I would like to insert some action part to the webinar as well. And I suggest that we right now can take an action to address this injustice that France forced the Haitian to pay 150 million francs for their freedom. So I'm going to put in the chat the address of the email and the phone number of the French consulate in Boston. Send a message and a text of a message as well. Please send them a message demanding that they will repay this ransom money back to Haiti.
I must say, it's good you say that, because one of the reasons people say that Aristide was targeted in 2003, 2004 was him asking for that money back at the anniversary of, or demanding that France. And back then it was 21, I think almost $22 billion. And he had the audacity to demand it back, and which really upset the French and the Europeans. And so people say one of the main reasons, in addition to the fact that they thought he was too populist, one of the main reasons why the US, France, and Canada, after their private meetings in Ottawa in 2003, decided to get rid of Aristide was the request for this money back.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Jemima. Question, I see Susie Zeiger, your hands are up. Is up?
Yes, okay.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. There were two things I wanted to say. The reparations were not, I think you said it already, the reparations were not paid until after World War II. And the other thing that should be added is that when Bill Clinton was president, the United States started exporting American rice to Haiti, and they put the Haitian rice growers in the Altibonite Valley completely. They lost their livelihood. Well, there are so many reasons why Haiti is the way it is, really. And there's also a book that I liked very much. It was written by Randall Robinson. It's called Haiti, an Unbroken Agony. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it or not.
Yeah, it's about the 2004 coup d'etat.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
right here.
You have it.
A very good book.
I have it also. And
But the other one is
go ahead.
The other one is Peter Hallward's book, Damming the Floods. Haiti,
Yes.
Damming the Floods.
Yes. Yeah,
Thank you, Susie.
sure.
Tom, I see your hand is up, please.
Thank you very much. I'm from California, so I really don't have room in this group of MAPA, but I do want to know if on your agenda you're going to discuss the Montana-Penn Accord. We're at the bridge, well, we've been at the bridge of Haiti falling even worse apart without any solution. The Montana-Penn Accord is one of the solutions, and we need to get the Biden administration to take support away from Prime Minister Dr. Henry. That's my question. Are we going to be able to discuss that?
Yes, definitely. Yes, definitely. Absolutely. Before we get to that, which is on the agenda, I wanted to ask you, Jemima, last July, Jovenel Moise was assassinated. What do we know about this assassination? Who did it? Was there anybody that was punished for it?
Yeah, so till this day, the assassination has the investigation into assassination in the Haiti from Haiti's side has actually come to a standstill. The US, which is interesting because we always have to wonder, because this is when you have to wonder about Haiti's status as a sovereign nation, because it's not, is carrying on its investigation. It's arrested a couple of people. All the Colombians are still in prison in Haiti, even though I think there's going to be some kind of agreement between Ariel Henry and the Colombian government to actually extradite them to the US. But the thing about the assassination of Jovenel Moise that we have to think about, it's hard to talk about the assassination without talking about the last 20 years of an occupation. And so I think for me, the biggest thing that's the most important part is to talk about the fact that the Haiti we're talking about is not the Haiti of 1804. It's a Haiti that's under complete occupation, that has complete state capture by a group of foreigners. and that no decision, including elections and so on and so forth, is made without the foreigners. So to me, Haiti is a de facto colony ever since 2004, when it's elected president, when it's overwhelmingly democratically elected president, I think with 75% of the votes, was elected and then taken out of the country by US planes and sent to Africa, ironically, in exile. And then this was, this was then consolidated by a UN occupation. And so we also have to wonder, we have to talk about these the so-called international community, which is Western powers, right? That the UN represents, OAS and so on and so forth, which we also go to, right, for justice. But the UN consolidated this occupation, this coup d'etat, by bringing in so-called peacekeeping, which was under Chapter 7, which means that they could use military force against the Haitian people. And this occupation continues because through this military occupation, you have, from 2004, you have, at any given point, thousands of armed troops, military barracks and outposts throughout the country that were there until 2017, and then replaced by an integrated office. But what they did set up was what they call the core group, which is an unelected group of foreigners who make all the decisions in Haiti, who decide who's president, who's not president. And up until this day, whatever the core group says, is the law of the day. They do press releases, and that's how you know what their decision on Haiti is. And so for me, we cannot talk about Haiti as a sovereign nation if we don't acknowledge that Haiti is a de facto colony. And the first and foremost thing that we need to do is disband the core group and get rid of the foreigners who are running the show in Haiti. So that's that. Having said that, what's important then is to understand then how Moise came to power. Moise came to power because he was handpicked by Martelly. But Martelly came to power in 2010 after the OAS changed the election results in the first round after the earthquake, and demanded, and with Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State of Barack Obama, leaving the Middle East, this is during the Arab Spring, flying to Haiti and threatening the sitting president, René Breval, with exile if they didn't agree to this shift, because they wanted Michel Martelly of this right-wing neo-Duvalierist party that he put together. This was the hand-chosen leader for Haiti by the US, France, and Canadian governments, those three together in particular, and demanded that he come to power. And so the PHTK that has been the bane of Haiti's existence. They've caused so much, they've wreaked so much havoc, they've stolen so much money, and they've caused a lot of deaths, right? But they were imposed on the Haitian people. And so Moise was handpicked by Martelly. And I think what happened with the Moise assassination is that there was a split in the PHTK. I think Martelly wanted Moise to sit there and not do too much so that he could come back and take power, because Haitian constitution does not allow you to serve 2 consecutive terms. You have to step down and come back. And so I think there was a split among the elite, and they decided to get rid of Moise. This is a multi-million-dollar operation to pay 26 Colombian mercenaries, to pay their salaries for months, and then to have a way for them to get out, and then to be able to hide the money, to hide the traces of that money. And so a lot of us think that there's some very big part of the elite of the oligarchy in Haiti funded this. And a lot of people believe that Michel Martelly is part of it. And also Ariel Henry, the sitting prime minister, so he unelected, is very much implicated in this. My thing is, the US government knows everything that goes on in Haiti, and the US government knows who is behind this assassination. If you remember, the FBI flew into Haiti and took all the evidence from Moise's house after the assassination. And they still have that evidence, and they still have CCTV camera. They have all of that. So the US knows exactly what's going on. And if we don't know anything, it's because they don't want us to know.
Yes, yes. And what is the background of the new puppet dictator, Ariel Henry?
Ariel Henry is been around. He's been a US puppet for a long time. And which is why, so Ariel Henry, after the 2004 coup d'etat, the Bush administration brought in U.S. troops, right? And so they call it this was so before the UN came. So from March, from late February, because Aristide was deposed in February 28, 29. From that moment up until June 1st, when the UN mission, which was, by the way, the UN Security Council had France and the US in there that demanded this UN mission. So when before that, you had the US troops controlling Haiti and also really putting down a lot of protests. And what we don't hear, there were a lot of protests against the coup d'etat and in support of Aristide. Thousands of Aristide supporters were killed during that time period. And Ariel Henry, so the US, what they did was they came in and then they brought in some guy from Florida who hadn't lived in Haiti for 30 years, I keep forgetting his name, to be the leader, to be the leader of Haiti. And then they created what they called a council of elders to help as a transition government. And Ariel Henry was on the council of elders. So he's always been part of that imperial machination, right? The neo-colonial stooges that do the work, right, of the imperial powers. And so then right before Jovenel Moise was assassinated, he was under a lot of pressure. Remember, he refused to step down when his term was up in February 2021. There were a lot of protests, and there have been protests against him from the very beginning because his election was even less popular than Michel Martelly's. There have been protests against him nonstop. And then in 2018, there were protests against him for the corruption around the Petro-Caribe funds. And we can talk about that if you want, which was a money that was set up by the Venezuelan Hugo Chavez government to help Caribbean nations use their oil wealth to help Caribbean nations develop. $3 billion of that money was taken by the PHTK, Michel Martelly's government. And so there were protests from 2018, 2019, when Haiti was forced by the US to get out of the Petro-Caribe funds, at the same time raise gas prices. So then there were protests against that. And so Moise had changed his prime minister a few times. This is an unelected position. It's appointed by the president. And so right before he was assassinated, he was convinced by Martelly, that's what people are saying, to put Ariel Henry as the prime minister, to remove Claude Joseph, who was also interim. And so Claude Joseph's term had ended. Ariel Henry had not yet been made officially the prime minister when Jovenel Moise was assassinated. So then there was a moment where Claude Joseph had resigned, and then Ariel Henry, who was coming in, they did not know what to do. So then Claude Joseph declared himself prime minister. And then the US and the core group, at first the core group, announced that Claude Joseph would be the new prime minister of Haiti. And then Biden sent a high level group to Haiti over that weekend and convinced the core group that Ariel Henry then would be prime minister, and Claude Joseph stepped down, and then Ariel Henry was announced as prime minister of Haiti. So what we have is a completely undemocratic system of governance in Haiti that has nothing to do with the masses, with the will of the masses and so on, and that has everything to do with the core group and what the US wants.
Well, it's very interesting, Jemima, that you are bringing the issue of the mercenaries from Colombia, because Colombia is a global partner of NATO as of last year. US has military bases there, and US has access to all the military bases on Colombia, and Colombia is becoming a hub for mercenaries.
Yes.
That actually were involved also in a coup attempt in Venezuela.
Venezuela, exactly. Yes.
So it's interesting, of course, that Chavez Venezuela was generous to contribute oil to
exactly
the Caribbean, to Haiti.
Exactly. And we have to think about, this globally, right? And why Haiti is so significant, right? In addition to, I think it's a continuous counter-revolution of the West against Haiti for destroying the system of slavery and destroying Napoleon. Haiti is strategically located, right? The US has been wanting this small island in the north part of Haiti since the late 1800s. In fact, Guantanamo Bay was constructed, as a base because they couldn't get that Mole St. Nicholas in northern Haiti. And so as the US, they were tempting, shift east towards their next, they say their next greatest enemy is China. They need Haiti as this central part because they want to establish, a base there so that you can get to Haiti through the Panama Canal to get to the eastern part of the world quicker. And so in addition to that, expanding NATO, which was supposed to be a North Atlantic treaty, but expanding NATO down southward to work with Southcom, which is the Southern Command, as they ramp up the shift to Asia. And so it is really important to see Haiti as central to that. People think, well, why would they want to bother with this small country that means nothing? There's a lot in Haiti that's going on, including fracking, all these oil companies without a government. What my family has been reporting is it's a tiny village in this in southern western part of Haiti. People are seeing these huge fracking operations happening right offshore, and they have no say. So there's oil in Haiti, there are minerals, and there are all kinds of things that these governments want, in addition to having the strategic geopolitical location of that country for the U.S. military to have its way.
Yeah, well, we might as well mention that it was Haiti that supplied Bolivar with weapon and assistance when he was on his way to liberate Venezuela. So there is a long history of and significance, of course, historical significance to Haiti. Bruce, Nestor, I see your hand is up.
I just very briefly wanted to add to Jomina's great explanation. I was in Haiti in March of 2004 with a delegation of the National Lawyers Guild visiting the National Penitentiary, where U.S. soldiers were guarding, in their words, or imprisoning members of Aristide's government that had just been overthrown in the coup. We weren't allowed to talk to them, even though they were there as ministers of an elected government. We weren't allowed to talk to them, weren't allowed to have contact to them. And we saw French soldiers in camps right next to camps of the armed rebels that had taken part in the coup, doing absolutely nothing to disarm them, to restrain them. In other words, the Western military forces were playing a critical role in ensuring the success of the coup.
No, you're absolutely right, and even before that, right? Because this is how our media works, right? There's a great article in Counterpunch called "How to Turn a Priest into a cannibal," where up until the coup, there was all these stories from 2000, 2003 about Aristide being this monster, doing all these things because you're setting up, the boogeyman. We know this, the bad man narrative in US press to prepare us for the demonization of Aristide that went along with the coup d'etat. And, we'll never know how many thousands of Aristide supporters that were killed. And that really is what destroyed the Lavalas party, which is now like a shadow of itself, right? People destroyed it completely. And it was the first major mass movement in a long time since independence, right? That you had people, he wasn't asking for much. It was like, moving from extreme poverty to less poverty. That's what you wanted for the people. And so part of that is, we have to think about like this machination, the role of the media, the Western media in allowing this to happen. But also, the US military, this is a military occupation, which continues. The other thing we have to know is that one of the first things that the US and Canada and France built in Haiti after the earthquake were prisons were prisons, right? And so we have to think about, where is it that they think that these Black people deserve to be, right? And so we built prisons, we armed the police, which has been known to be brutal towards the population, which are trained outside. And so part of that, we have to also know, like, there's so many levels to this control of this country, in addition to, for example, the National Endowment for Democracy funding so-called protests, right? Revolutionary protests and student protests, color revolutions, we'd call them. And so it's a multi-pronged effort. And I think if we don't understand what happened to Haiti from 2000 to now, like, to understand what the US does elsewhere, right? The way that people deal with Venezuela, how people talk about Venezuela, how people talk about Nicaragua, Bolivia. You have to understand Haiti as like the longest neo-colonial experiment in the modern world, because everything that's been done to Haiti is tried elsewhere, and not the other way around. And it's just, and part of the problem is people exceptionalize Haiti and they don't realize similar processes happening everywhere. And I think studying Haiti would actually help us understand and explain what's going on in the rest of the region when it comes to US imperialism.
Yes, and maybe now we can go to, you mentioned Fanmi Lavalas. On August 30th, 2021, the Popular Organization in Haiti met in the Hotel Montana and signed what is known as the Citizen Conference for the Solution of the Crisis, or the Montana Accord for short. Tell us, what is in this accord and what is the status of it? What is the response of the Biden administration to this accord and where it is now? And then Tom, do you want to add something to this question?
Yeah, who's Tom? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, that's the question I've been wondering, because we're a couple of organizations have started a campaign. I thought you folks might be able to join it. There's a Move On petition that the Haiti Response organization put together with Melinda Miles. They have a Move On thing, and they have a tremendous amount of information about the Montana Accord. So if we have any time to work on this, I hope we're going to do it instead of talking about all the horrible problems that Haiti has suffered. But now the real problem is to get the United States away from Ariel Henry, the acting prime minister, and to support the Montana Penn Accord. It's got a new name now, but I don't know how people here on this group feel about that, so maybe we should discuss it.
Put your email on the chat and we will be in touch to talk about it. And in the meantime, Jemima, please tell us more about the Montana Accord.
Yeah, what's significant about the Montana Accord? Oh, I think, did I lose you all?
No, you are with us.
Okay, so I have two Zoom things open. Are you still there?
Yes, we can see you and hear you.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So the Montana Accords are, what's significant about them are the large numbers of signatories and the fact that they were able to get a number of organizations, including, the churches. And we have to remember the church's role in Haiti is very important. And the church, especially the Catholic Church, has played a really terrible role in supporting all the coups d'etats and so on. But the churches, civil society, a few what they would call grassroots organizations, a lot of really traditional politicians coming together to sign this accord. And it was really set up because there was a called the Commission for the Search for a Haitian Solution to the Crisis, which came together in February, right before February 2021, when Jovenel Moise's term was supposed to be over. And so this accord was, put together a transition, a 2-year transition, and said that it would be like a transition formula with a government's timeline that places national elections in 2023. Because one of the things that the U.S. wants was they want fast elections, and so they want Haitians to have elections quickly, because then it looks like Haiti is suffering and they've taken care of this problem that they think they have, even though they created the problem. And so this transition was has a proposed leadership structure of, I think, an interim president, a prime minister overseeing a diminished version of the Haitian government, and then a larger transitional council to work. So it's a 3-tier transitional government that they were setting up to do. And then so part of it is, so they had this accord. This was in August. At the same time, Ariel Henry was against this accord and came up with what they called the September 11th Accord. And it's called the Montana Accord because it was signed in Hotel Montana in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And so the September 11th Accord was a disparate political factions that favor Henry's transition plan. Basically, Henry wants a new constitution that gives more power to the presidency as opposed to a shared power between the prime minister and the president. And then they want to hold elections by the end of the year. The Montana Accord people saying, well, this situation is not set up for elections at the end of the year. There's insecurity, there's a lot of the kidnappings, and especially since the assassination, the gang violence against the local populations. And then the Montana Accord got together, and I forgot, in January 2023, and they voted on their prime minister and presidential candidate. But what's been the problem then is that there are a couple of things with the Montana Accord. The first thing is that even though it included a number of small grassroots organizations, it was the traditional politicians. I called it the bourgeois opposition, right? It's some of the same people that have been part of Haitian politics from the very beginning. And then Fanmi Lavalas left the accord in January 23 and 23, saying that even in this moment, they've always wanted a complete break. And they said the choice of political party leaders already sullied the accord, because it's not creating the space for a new beginning and a full break. And then one of the more radical grassroots organization called Molegaf, they left the accord 2 weeks ago. And they're saying that this is we're back to politics as normal. And one of the key things, if you look on Twitter, and look at Montana Accords, is the Montana Accord organizers begging the U.S. for attention, right? So meeting with Kenneth Merton, which is, so now the U.S. Kenneth Merton, who many of you might not know, was behind, who was there during the coup d'etat against Aristide, was part of the conversation that threatened Preval. I mean, not Aristide, that brought in Martelly and the PHTK into power. This is 2010. And so this guy is back in Haiti. And so now all these elite politicians have taken over the Montana Accord and silenced the more radical voices. And they're doing the same things. They're playing the game. They're in these meetings with the core group and so on and so forth, begging for access, begging for them to have attention. And even when they go against Ariel Henry, the U.S. government obviously is still supporting Henry, who's very much implicated in this. And so I think the U.S. government and the core group, they're talking about the accord now after a lot of pushing, some of these leaders having access to writing. You always know how grassroots an organization is when how non-grassroots an organization is when their leaders get to write an op-ed in the New York Times to express their demands, right? And so that's what happened with the leaders of the Montana Accord. We got to write an op-ed in the Miami Herald saying why his accord was better. And so now it's become politics as normal in terms of like a neo-colonial government begging the US for attention. And I think a lot of the grassroots and radical movements are saying that the accord is no longer something that represents the people, because it's these same neo-colonial politicians trying to grab control. And the other thing is, until the US really stop supporting Henry, there cannot be true democratic change in Haiti. I don't know if you wanted to add more, Tom, to this.
Well, thank you, Jemima. I guess you have just what you said about the Montana Accord, and now has Montana Pen modifié for the title because of the joining of Montana with a group of political people. I think the people I've been dealing with would not agree that it's a retake or a remake of the Bald Head Party. And
oh no, I'm not saying it's a remake of the Bald Head Party. I'm saying it's all the traditional. The Montana people are against the Henry. They want him out. Yeah. But people are saying it's part of this, the same traditional politicians that
that's what I meant about the Bald Head
Party. that really search for, that are working along the lines with the core group and Kenneth Merton to get their agenda pushed push forward, but then it's still the same political leaders. And that was the critique of the Fanmi Lavalas, as well as the critique of Molegaf, because they're like, this is no longer a grassroots organization, it's all these traditional politicians trying to vie for power. And so that's the critique that they have, yeah.
And I guess I'm going to point out that there is a disagreement with that. I've seen 5-6 pages of peasant groups who have signed on to the Montana Accord. And the problem is, what else are we going to do? How are you going to deal with no government if we get rid of Henry? What's going to happen then? Who's going to be in any place to do anything? The Montana Accord itself is I believe, my opinion, a very well done and well covered in terms of all different groups. It's not just politicians. As I say, it was the peasants group, the human rights groups, RNDDH, for instance, and artists. And so it's a non-political group. In any case, I don't think you want to start discussing this right now, maybe. But it is so urgent to get something like the Montana Accord out there and have them drop Henry. Things are just getting worse and worse without any control.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't disagree with you that this is that, and that was what remarkable about the Accord, that they were able to get a number of people to sign it, but the people running the Accord are not the grassroots organizations. They're Monique Kesla, you know, they're very specific names of people who are, you know, part of that bourgeois political elite. And I think it is important. I guess the question for me, and I guess it is an open discussion, right, for us to think about, what does it mean? Okay, so is the ask to just get rid of Henry? Or is the ask to get rid of US imperialism in Haiti? Is it to just put in another set of puppets who will continue to do the work of the US, Canada, the core group in Haiti? Because that's what the Fanmi Lavalas. So you get rid of Henry, and then you have these traditional politicians, which is what has become you know, the people who are now the spokespeople, who get to sit at the table with Merton and Helen Lalim and whoever the core group representatives are. The critique is that you get rid of Henry and then you replace it with the same old, you know, neo-colonial politicians in Haiti. And I think this particular group has been very vocal in saying, as well as Fanmi Lavalas, it's like, we want a solid break with the way things have been. And I think it's fair to acknowledge that part of it as well. And I also wonder, you know, all of a sudden, mainstream media are pushing for the Montana Accords or pushing for a particular aspect of the Montana Accord. And so what people are wondering is just like, okay, so we get rid of Henry, are we going to still end up with the same kind of politics as usual? And I think that's my critique. And I'm not saying that we should get rid of it completely, but I do think it needs to be reconfigured. And I think the grassroots people need to actually have a say. And I think they've been silenced within the Accords. They've been silenced by the English speakers, the diaspora. I mean, their vote was in Louisiana, right? It wasn't done in Haiti.
No.
For when they picked the president at what it was in Louisiana State University, when they picked the president and prime minister. That's when that vote occurred. Yes.
Did you say that's where the Montana Accord was done?
No, the Montana Accord was done in Montana Hotel in Haiti. Right. The vote for president and vice president and prime minister was done in Louisiana at Louisiana State University. And yes, they had a conference where they chose.
That was the Louisiana Accord that was funded by the Haiti government.
Right.
And the person that ran it was a retired Haitian American general.
Haitian American general, right.
Which had nothing to do with Montana. And in fact, it has flopped and it's gone away. It's not an existing.
Right, but Tom, So Tom, we're going to disagree because I do think we are going to disagree because I do think there is something, the point is not to just get rid of Henry. The point is to have a full break with neo-US colonialism and imperialism and the core group in Haiti. And at this point, we were really supporting the Montana Accords. We thought it was a great thing of bringing people together. But every day what we see is more and more concessions to Kenneth Merton, to the core group and so on and so forth. And I think I salute the Fanmi Lavalas in January for leaving the Montana court, and now Moliga for leaving the Montana court. And so I do think it's important for us to actually, I support the Lavalas move that we need a complete break from the traditional politicians, or else we're going to end up in this situation 5 years from now, 6 years from now. And the first thing I think Haiti needs to do is to dismantle the core group. I don't think they should have that much say. And I think before we can do anything else, that should have been, and that's not even in the accord, right? Like getting rid of this core group and this international cabal that runs politics in Haiti. So,
well, I should mention that there is another webinar which is planned for this Saturday. Let me put it on the screen. I already put the link to register for it in the chat. This is the webinar.
oh yes, thank you. Yeah.
It is organized by the Haiti Action Committee, and it looks like a leader from the Fanmi Lavalas will be there. And I think this conversation, I'm sure, will continue then in this webinar. Do you see the information? And as I said, I put a link to this webinar in the chat. Susie, I see your hand. You unmute yourself.
Okay. This is totally off the subject. I mean, what you were just talking about. I'm curious about the huge number of gangs in Haiti, especially I think in Port-au-Prince now. And how did that begin? I assume it was because there was a power void, right?
Yeah, well, but there have always been gangs here and there, especially since, before, you had the Tonton Macoute, which was the
Yes,
gang
of course.
for Duvalier, but
Mhm.
gangs have been used by the elite a long time. First of all, you have to wonder, a country as poor as Haiti, where do they get these heavy military equipment from? Where do they get these guns? How do these guns, and Haiti supposedly has an arms embargo. How are the guns coming into the country? So you ask that question, then you say, well, who owns the ports, right? The guns are coming through the ports, and the ports are owned by I think 4 or 5 families, the oligarchy, right? And in the past, gangs have been used by the oligarchy to settle, prop debts or settle whatever problem. And so they were armed and paid to be, to go and, rough up people, rough up neighborhoods and so on and so forth. And then they were used again, for example, if we think about the Lasalin Massacre in Haiti in 2018, they were used by the sitting government, the PHTK, which has used them and funded them. They're bribed, we've heard that Henri bribed some gangs because he was trying to have a ceremony for Henri Christophe, for Henri Christophe's birthday or one of these ceremonies. And they get bribed to allow passage for military, for government officials. And so part of that is just in the void, they've gotten even more powerful and they're getting more and more guns. And some of them, some of them, have decided that, they're using their power, right? They can control when oil flows and when gas flows and gas doesn't flow. But it did begin with the elite arming groups of poor young men who have nothing to do, right? No job, there are no jobs, there's no education, to go take care of whatever they wanted. And so now it's just gotten worse because there are more arms coming into the country, and there's no, and the national police is very much, corrupt and implicated in all of that. And so then that's really what's happening. They've just proliferated, but they've always been around to do the dirty work. It's just now there are a lot more of them, and they've gotten more powerful with more guns and more money.
Yes. Tom, did you want to say something?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I thought I was muted. Sorry about that. Thank you. And again, Jamina, I want to disagree with the point about dealing with Henri. If you read the Accord, and I've translated it from English into English from French. You'll see that, and then all the other work that's been done by different groups that I've been working with, they want to get rid of, and not just Henri, but everything that he represents in the oligarch crowd that want to continue to keep on running Haiti. So they definitely are against all of that. And so I guess somehow or other, this group has to have a discussion and get the facts. I put the Move On petition on the chat, as well as the Haiti Response Coalition site. Haiti Response Coalition started in 2010. I don't know if anybody has been involved with that. I didn't get that much involved, but they worked on the, after the earthquake of 2010, trying to help people recover from that. And it sort of went out of the distance. I didn't see it anymore until last year, or the 2020. Melinda Miles is the director. And if you look at their page on the talking points for the their Hands Off Haiti democracy petition, you'll get tremendous amount of detail about the Montana Accord that I think contradicts some of what Jamina is saying.
Look, Tom, we're gonna disagree because I'm not saying there's anything, I'm not saying the Montana Accord themselves are wrong. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them. What I'm saying is the way that they're being pursued to be implemented is the critique. The critique, the reason you have Fanmi Lavalas and groups like Moligaf sign on to it, because they agreed with the terms. So I've read the Montana Accord, they agreed with the terms, they agreed with the transition, the 2-year transition, and so on and so forth. But what's happened since that is that it's been taken over by the traditional political elite, and they're in their neo-colonial dealings with, you know, the core group, trying to get the blessings of the core group and the U.S. government. People have become disillusioned in that. Why is it that they're begging for this? Why are they begging for acceptance? And so there's a distinction between, like, you can have an amazing document, and then you can have, you know, the problems around its implementation and the road to implementation. Then that just immediately undermines the documentation. And so that's my critique. My critique is not the document as much as it is how it's being pursued and how it's being pushed. And that's where the critique of Lavalas is, and who it is then that becoming the leaders, who it is that gets to talk to, you know, that's going to meet with the core group, that's flying to Washington and meeting with Brian Nichols and all these other people. So that's my critique, not the document, but how it is being pursued by these particular kinds of these politicians that have become the spokespeople for the document. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. I want to, my friend Paul is there I think in Miami. Paul, how you doing?
Fine, thank you. I hear what Jamina Pierre is saying. I hear what Tom Luce is saying. I think that we can agree with the legitimate origin of the Commission for a Haitian Solution to the Crisis, and with we can agree that it's a strategic move on the part of, you know, Montana/Penn to go in the way that they're doing. I think that from an ideological or from a principle standpoint, we can critique them. I mean, obviously, there are elements, there are political party elements within Penn who have been involved with death squad activity. I mean, this is true, as has the power at B. But I think that the question here, I mean, again, we can.
We lost you, Paul. We lost you, Paul.
Paul and I are good friends.
Okay. Okay. Well, I want to, we are almost at the end of the program, and there is one more subject that I think we need to discuss. Jemima, in September 2021, Daniel Foote resigned from his position as U.S. Special Envoy for Haiti. In his letter of resignation, he said, "I don't want to be associated with the U.S. inhumane, counterproductive decision to depart thousands of Haitian refugees. what our Haitian friends really want and need is opportunity to chart their own course without international puppeteering and favored candidate, which you just talked about, Jemima, but with a genuine support for that, of course. And he said, last week, the US and other embassies in Port-au-Prince issued another public statement of support for the unelected de facto Prime Minister, Dr. Ariel Henry, as the interim leader of Haiti. The hubris that make us believe we should pick the winner again is impressive. This cycle of international political intervention in Haiti has consistently produced catastrophic results. This is a quote from him. Then we know that in February 17, 2022, the Biden administration hit a sad and stunning milestone when it deported 20,000 Haitian refugees. In March 16, Congressman Ayanna Presley called on the Department of Homeland Security to end Title 42 and cease deportation of people from Haiti. And this letter followed the Biden administration decision to suspend the deportation of Ukrainians. So I want you to comment on this, Jemima, that look at the preferential treatment to Ukrainian refugees and look what is done to Haitian refugees.
All I have to say is just 2 days ago, there was another deportation flight of 181 people to Haiti. Since September, you're right, the numbers are actually more like 22,000 that have been deported. So even though I think what was the outrage was much more of the visual of seeing the Texas Rangers going after Haitians, but we have to know that this, the treatment of migrants at the border, and I'm in Southern California, so the treatment of migrants are absolutely terrible. I worked there as a translator for the court cases, and I've been working with Haitian migrants at that border since 2017 when they started coming in, and it's been terrible. And I think the hypocrisy of U.S. policy when it comes to Ukraine compared to the rest of the world is something we have to talk about, like white supremacy and racism when it comes to the differential treatment of white people who are suffering from war and displacement and versus non-white people. And so recently, I was the Black Alliance for Peace. We sent a delegation to the border I was there September, right after what happened in Del Rio. And if you go to the border, there's a tent city, thousands and thousands and thousands of Central American, South American, Haitian, and African, right? So African migrants are there. A lot of them are stuck now at, and we have to blame the Mexico government for going along with this because they've deployed their National Guard against these migrants. And then there's stories where the churches are coming in with Ukrainian flags, coming to the border, and the Ukrainians can just walk across as if they're coming from vacation. They have their roller bags. You see the pictures. Yeah, their roller bags, and they come through. The churches are there to provide food and stuff for them. And then you see the members of the church saying, this is in San Diego, saying, well, they can come and stay with us. People are opening up their homes. At the same time where, Title 42, I don't know if you all know this, Title 42 was, an old law that's in there that's basically, it denies asylum seekers due process. It basically doesn't even allow you to ask for asylum, and they use COVID as a reason. And so this is how they've been able to, and it started under Trump, even though it was with Trump that started the Remain in Mexico, where before you can come up to the border and ask to be processed for asylum. Now with Trump it was like Remain in Mexico. Under Obama, they had this thing where they slowed down the pace of who would go in, or they would bring you in and hold you in prison. And so we used to bond out people with $50,000 bonds, right, for just asking for asylum. And so it's just really terrible. And Haitians have really borne the brunt of this. And we have to know, people don't realize this, but I wrote about this back in January, and I called it, by then Biden had deported 700,000 people under Title 42. We're at about 1 million. and not just Haitians, but all kinds of people. And you still have kids in cages. There are about 10,000 kids still in cages. And so so the Haitians really represent this, where we're talking about getting rid of Title 42. It's supposed to end in May, but that's that's one of the more egregious things. There's still tons of people in prison. They've expended it. They're funding the new budget in addition to funding the military. They've expended the budget for ICE and the Border Patrol. And so now they're holding more people in prison than they were before. And then the numbers, they're like a 2-3 year wait now to actually come up to the border in Mexico to ask for asylum. So what we've seen are communities in Mexico. We've gone to, there are African communities, Haitian communities, Venezuelan, and all kinds of other communities in Mexico waiting to be processed. And it's really a travesty of justice. And to very specifically in terms of Haiti, is the reason Haitians are at the U.S.-Mexico border is because because the U.S. is in Haiti messing things up and has been messing things up in Haiti for a very long time. And so we need to really call this government to account for causing the wave. No one wants to leave their country. No one wants to come and be treated brutally. And it is just terrible. And it's just really, it's just something that's heartbreaking, but makes perfect sense in terms of thinking about the racist policies of U.S. immigration laws, and also the racist ways that the U.S. has dealt with Haiti as a country and Black people.
Yes, it is absolutely outrageous. Before we end the conversation, I would like to invite you to our next Haiti Solidarity subgroup of MAPA. We are planning a series of action to demand that France return the freedom ransom to Haiti and to honor Haiti. And we are planning to do it on May 18, which is the Haitian Flag Day. And we are planning to go outside the French consulate in Boston to demand that France return the money to Haiti as an educational event. Now, the French have consulates everywhere in the United States. So I think that this is something that can be done not just in Boston, but can be done simultaneously in other cities as well. Again, to pressure France to do the right thing, but also as an education. Sometimes it is easier to demand reparation for somebody else than for your own people in this country. So the idea of reparation is a very important issue that will come up in this country as well. So I hope that you can contact us. I put my email in the chat. If you are interested to join the MAPA Haiti Solidarity subgroup, please send me an email, and we will be glad to if you join us. Before somebody that haven't spoken so far, is there anybody who would like to make a comment, to ask a question?
I just have a quick question. I don't know if at one point you said May 8th and then you said May 18th. So
I'm sorry. I mean May 18 is a Haitian
Flag Day. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But on May 8th, there is going to be a meeting of the Haiti MAPA subgroup. We will meet on the 8th, and then the action is planned for the May 18.
I see. Okay, thank you.
So please join us. Please join us.
Okay.
I wanted to say something quickly about reparations. I don't know if you all know, there was a report that came out, and this is about like how it was the European, it was the slave masters that got compensated. There was a report that came out very recently that the British government only in 2015 finished paying slave owners for the loss of their Africans in the Caribbean. So I don't know if you all have heard about this, but
no, I never heard about it.
Yeah, it's a big story that apparently when the British banned the slave trade, they compensated the owners, and they had to take a loan for $20 million. This is back to 1800. And there's a huge story, I think in the Telegraph or the Guardian. And so they took this loan, and then it was only 2015 that they finished paying off the loan to the slave owners.
It's
And so it's just really fascinating that the only people that have gotten reparations are the slaveholders.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know if you are aware, there was a study that was done about the relationship between Harvard University and slavery.
Yes.
They just came out as well.
Yeah.
Very
So this is a link for you all who just want to talk about slavery compensation. This is really
Okay.
important.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I think
Okay.
Rob, question.
yeah, I have a question. I'm Robin from Burlington, Vermont, maker of Black Dawn, the animated film of the Haitian Revolution. My
cool.
question is, what is Aristide doing now, and could he be making a comeback? Maybe this was already covered, but I might have missed some of the discussion.
Yeah, well, he can't make a comeback because the Haitian Constitution does not allow more than 2 terms. Even though he was deposed both terms, he can't run. But Aristide's been doing, even Aristide has a university and a hospital that has graduated hundreds of doctors and business and lawyers and business people in the past, few years. And so just the last set of graduation happened in, I think, February or March this year. So he's at UNIFA, the Aristide University in Haiti, and that's what he's doing. He's just been working with, getting young people educated.
But he was robbed of 3 years of being a president.
Yeah.
He was what?
robbed for 3 years, right?
Yes, both times. The first time he was robbed, and the second, the first time definitely. But the Constitution doesn't allow that, so it is a shame. And also, we have to say that Fanmi Lavalas has lost its robustness, right? It's lost a lot of people, and a lot of it has to do with the response to being really targeted by all the right-wing governments that were placed in charge after the coup d'etat.
Sure.
Okay, Jemima, I want to thank you so much, and I want to thank everybody that participated in this webinar. Please, again, I would like to invite you to our Haiti Solidarity group. It doesn't matter even if you are not in New England, you can join us. And thank you, everybody, and have a good night.
Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. Thanks, y'all, for inviting me.
No, thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.